After months of planning, we were excited to go to Iceland. We flew from Charlotte, North Carolina, through New York City, and arrived in Iceland on a Sunday morning, landing at the Keflavik airport. We rented a camper van and drove it across a barren landscape towards the capital city, Reykjavik. The camper van had been converted, so the back seat was now a bed and it had a refrigerator, sink, and heater. We checked into the Skokie Hotel and slept for a few hours before going down to the waterfront to see the Sun Voyager statue. We went on a walking tour around the capital city. Our tour guide told us that in Iceland there is no bad weather, only bad clothing and bad attitudes. So we got to see several sites around the capital city, and she did a wonderful job explaining the history of Iceland. At the end of the tour, we went to the famous concert hall. And the best part of the tour is at the end of it, you just pay what you feel like the tour was worth. Iceland is famous for their lamb-based hot dogs, and I agree, they are very tasty. We then walked up the hill to the famous church. We were able to ride an elevator up to the top that gave us a great view of the entire city. Even though it was getting late in the day, because we visited in May, it was still very bright out at night. We then had a wonderful dinner to finish our first full day in Iceland. We started our second day by walking by the Hofti House, which is famous for a meeting between Reagan and Gorbachev that helped end the Cold War, and they also say the house is haunted. We then walked along the coast before getting in our camper van and heading northeast towards the mountains. We went to Pingvellir National Park, where we could see the European and North American continents splitting apart. We had some great hiking around the national parks and saw the Prime Minister's summer house and an ancient church. We then got back in our camper van and continued driving east to a hot springs bathing pool. We then drove to the original geyser and saw several erupt. After seeing the geysers, we continued driving on to a giant waterfall called Gullfoss. We finished our second day at the Skogul campground enjoying a wonderful pizza. The next day we woke up and drove across gravel roads to go to the Carid crater. After hiking around the crater, we were able to hike on a trail that takes you down to the water's edge. We then continued driving to the town of Selfoss, where Bobby Fischer is buried. We then continued driving farther east to the Seljandafoss waterfall. We continued driving farther southeast, went down a gravel road, parked, and then hiked towards a hidden natural pool. When Amanda went to take a panorama picture, I ran around behind her to get this neat image. We then arrived at the pool that's been there since 1923 with natural hot water. Just a few more minutes down the road took us to the Skogafoss waterfall. We hiked up to the top for great views of the whole area. We continued driving around the ring road, continuing farther southeast, where we saw lava fields. A giant volcanic eruption happened here that caused famines across Europe. After driving for a few hours, we arrived at the Svinefell campground, which was a beautiful location surrounded by sheep. We woke up early and continued driving east until we arrived at our glacier kayaking adventure. The area that we were kayaking in had water that was not exposed to the ocean, so the water temperature was very cold, which meant that the glaciers were very stable. However, a layer of dirt builds up on the top of the glaciers, which affects how things melt, and over time they can flip over. As water melts on an iceberg, it can burrow through and create a tunnel such as this one. The dirt on top of the icebergs can also pile up. After finishing our kayaking adventure, we decided this was as far east as we would travel in Iceland. We drove back west to Diamond Beach, and there is a nearby lagoon that is full of icebergs. These icebergs are in water from the ocean, which is warmer, so they tend to melt faster and therefore flip over more frequently. We drove west and went to another black sand beach that has famous basalt rock columns. It is also famous for waves that sneak up and soak tourists. Thankfully, we didn't get wet. What do you think, Amanda?
Pretty cool.
We then went west on the other side of the ring road and hiked to a glacier. We then went back to the Skogafoss waterfall and camped there overnight. By arriving late and leaving early, we didn't have to pay. We woke up the next day to a beautiful weather day. We went to the Deerhole lighthouse. We parked, hiked up the hill, and saw beautiful views of the coastline. After hiking back down to our camper van, we drove farther west across the country. We went across some very remote areas with a few other cars. We then arrived at the Blue Lagoon, where we had a wonderful time soaking in the mineral-rich bath. On our last day in Iceland, we returned our camper van after having driven 715 miles around the country. We headed home with many great memories of all the places we visited in Iceland.